So in this next project, we're going to be making the game Tic-Tac-Toe. Now this is going to be very similar to the labs we did on Tic-Tac-Toe earlier in the year. The only thing that really is going to be different is that, most important, is that we're going to make the game board by making a list of lists. So instead of having 3 separate lists, we will have one list with 3 lists inside of it representing the rows of the tic-tac-toe board. And for the most part, everything else is the same. We're going to take turns inputting X's and O's. Users can pick their space. That's about it. So let's get started, and the easiest way to get started is just to make our tic-tac-toe board. So I'm just going to make a variable called board, and we're going to set that equal to our list of lists. So we're going to make a list, and usually when we write a list of lists, we do something like this. We write the first list with the second list. We write the outer list with the inner list underneath. And the way I'm going to set up these lists is I'm just going to put 3 empty strings in the lists. So those will represent the 3 spaces in each row that I have to put my tic-tac-toe board. And we're going to separate each list by a comma. And there's my tic-tac-toe board. And you're actually going to find that there's just one, I wouldn't say problem, but if we try to print out our tic-tac-toe board, which we're going to want to do several times throughout the game, right? If we try to print this board, it's just going to print as a straight list. It doesn't look like a tic-tac-toe board. And so one of the things we could do, if we just printed each individual list, so print the first list that's in board, and then print the second list that's in board. Remember, 0 indexing for a list, so 0, 1, 2 to print the first, second, and third lists. It looks much more like a tic-tac-toe board. So one thing we could do is we could just put this inside a function, so whenever we want to print the board, it's a little bit quicker. So I'm going to define a function called, let's say, showBoard. And all showBoard is going to be these separate print statements. So that way, when I call showBoard, it should just show the board. So that way we could use this function over and over and over again. All right. So that gets us to the first part, which is making the board. And now the second part is that we need to be able to put X's and O's in this board. So how would we go ahead and do that? Well, I'm thinking ahead, and we know, well, let's just take a look at examples. So say, for example, I wanted the user to change the third item in the second row to, say, an X. Well, to do that, I'm just going to use my standard list indexing. I'm going to index the first list, so I want the second item, or index 1, to give me the second row. And then of that list, I'm going to want the third item, or the second index. And I'm going to set that equal to, let's say, the player's X. So if I do that, and let's print the board before and after. So we'll use our function showBoard. We'll use our function showBoard. And we'll see what happens. So you can see before, and then after, we have an X there. So our little indexing system here, the first index will refer to the row, the second index will refer to the column. So this is how we're going to end up changing our X's and O's. So we want to think ahead. We want to be able to change it to an X and O or any spot. So we're going to write this into a function. So any player could put an X or O there. So I'm going to call this function, let's call it placeTick. And I'm actually going to have this function take an argument called player. And player is either just going to be X or O. So we can fill that in accordingly. So the first thing I want to be able to do is I want to be able to grab some input from the user. So I'm going to ask them both where they want to place their tick, what row, and what column. So we could just do that. Let's call this a local variable called row. And row is equal to int input what row would you like to place your tick? And then we also need the column, and that's going to equal int input what column would you like to place your tick, right? So that way we get some input from the user, and then we also turn that into an integer, which we could then use to index. And then actually editing the board, we could just do something as simple as, we want to index, so we'll do like board, and then we want to use the first index is going to be the row, and we're actually going to do row -1, and the reason why we're going to do that is because the user will probably type in row 1, row 2, or with row 3, but our rows, again, are items in a list, so they're going to be 0 indexed. So they're actually going to be indexed by 0, 1, and 2. So we'll subtract 1 from whatever the user types in. And then we'll do the same thing for column. And there's the index that we had before, row and column. And we're going to set that equal to. And again, we're going to set it equal to player. So we could type in a string X or O here, and we'll put it accordingly. So hopefully this should work now. So let's just test it out. So let's print show board before the function. Actually, well, that's my function's definition. Oops, I forget to write def. There we go. So let's try it. We'll show board, and then let's call place tick, and let's pretend we're player X. So I want to place an X, and then we'll show the board again. And so we should get to see the board. We get asked what row we would like to place our tick, so let's just say row 2, and let's say column 1, so the space right here. And there we go, we have our X. So this function works out really well. We're actually just going to fix one thing about it. Let's say, for example, we try to do this more than once. We're going to find out, and let's just pretend we're player X and then player O. So let's do the same thing again, row 2, row 1, and notice I put my X here. What happens if player O wants to put his tick in the same spot? So he can go 2 and 1, and he can overwrite where X put his thing. We don't want that. So if there's an X down here, we can't put an O on top of that. We can't replace things in tic-tac-toe. That would be a weird game of tic-tac-toe. So let's build that functionality into our function here, place tick. So you can't place a tick in the same place twice. So the way that I'm going to do that is I am going to make a local variable called, let's call it taken, for the space being taken. I'm going to set that equal to true. And taken is going to stay true until the user picks a place that isn't taken. So we'll just do while taken. So as long as taken is true, which we set it equal to true. Oops, that's lowercase. There we go. While taken is true, so while taken, we're going to ask the person for a row and a column. And then after we ask them for the row or column, we're going to check to see if that row and column is taken. And if it's not taken, then we can exit out of this loop. If it is taken, we want to say, hey, that's taken, and ask these questions again. So we'll just do an if statement, and we will go if board row -1 and column -1 does not equal an empty space. Then we want to say print, sorry, that space is already taken. Try another. So if the space is not open, I mean someone's already put a thing there, sorry, space is already taken, try another. And as long as taken remains true, we'll go back to the top of the list. So how do we exit out of here? Well, if the space is not empty, we say this. If it is empty, then we can put the piece down. So we'll set taken equal to false, and that will allow us to exit this loop, and then this code right here will place the piece down. So let's give it a try. What row would you like to place your tick? Let's go ahead and try 2, 1. And then let's try to get the second player to do it as well. 2 and 1. Sorry that space is taken. Try another. And then we could go 8, 2, 2. We place our O there. So perfect. This prevents us from putting two things in the same space. There's actually just one more piece of one line of code I want to add before we leave. Just you can see this code right here is cool, but it doesn't tell you whose turn it is. So I can just add that into my function here called placeTick. We'll just print out at the top of it it's player turn. So that way when I run it, it's X's turn, right? So that way we print that out. We know whose turn it is, and then it tells us. All right, so that's a really good start. The first function placeTick here, we'll get X's on the board, O's on the board. We can use it for either X or O. So that's like pretty much half the game done there. When we come back, we'll start to look at how we can check to see if people have won.